Welcome and abracha, Baruch Ata Adonai Eloheinu Melech Haolam Asher Kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
And I'm going to start the screen share. If I can find 1 second, I may have to go back. Okay. 1 second. For some reason, let's see if this works. I don't know. Hold on a second. I'm going to change this. Let me go back into here. Okay, that looks fine. All right, let's try this again. There we go. So yesterday we had talked about this Petach Eynayim, right? This phrase Petach Eynayim in the text, and that Tamar sat Petach Eynayim, and we translated that as crossroads. But there were some interesting Rashis on that. Here's the Petach Eynayim. And one of the explanations was Pitcho shel Avraham Avinu, at the entrance of Abraham, our father. And we tried to understand what that meant. I was struggling with that as well. And it turns out that in the Torah Tamima, he explains more clearly what that means. So I was trying to figure out if Abraham, okay, what it does mean is the entrance of Abraham's tent. That's how we should understand it. One moment, please. Give me a moment. Okay. Okay. Thanks. And so the entrance of Abraham's tent, because he was hospitable, because we know that he and Sarah were so hospitable, and that's why it says Petach Eynayim. Hold on a second. Here we go. Shekol Eynayim mitzapot liroto, because everyone looked forward to see him. Okay, was looking forward to seeing him, and the answer, what that meant, what that was trying to say, was because they were so hospitable, people looked forward to visiting him there. So the question that I was asking myself was Tamar alive when Abraham was alive? And I was trying to work out the chronology in such a way to see how old Abraham would have been. And the idea was that, so it's still difficult to understand how that actually works out, unless they're simply saying that the idea of welcoming strangers, that was somehow the idea that was in there. It's still very difficult for me. Shirabeth, I don't know if you did any further research. I did, going into the Torah Tamimas right over here. So I just wanted to give you an opportunity to comment if you found out anything else.
Well, there's one comment that's similar to Rashi's that I found, where let's see, Rashbam.
Yes,
That was his grandson, I think.
correct. It was Rashi's grandson. Yes.
So he said something like, instead of Abraham's tent, he said it was a crossroads. And then the Eynayim part meant that everyone who walked there was visible.
Mm.
That was the Eynayim part.
Uh-huh.
And then there's something very different in the Hemek Davar. And he says it's about the Petach Eynayim. He says, "B'medinot halalu ein achsaniot al haderech." In those
Okay.
places, they didn't have inns,
Lodgings. Yeah, they didn't have inns.
along the roadside.
Mm-hmm.
Pi'im beit rekam, the enish darsham, but they had empty houses which nobody lived in.
Right.
And whoever needed a place to sleep as they went along the road would sleep there.
Mm-hmm.
And this was called Eynayim. vaYeshev mitot rekaniot, and there were empty beds there.
Right. Does he give any support as to where he finds it referred to as Eynayim?
Nope, I don't see any references
Right,
there.
because Rashi would tell you, right? He'd tell you either scripturally or elsewhere where he got that idea. So, okay, I mean, it's very interesting. We'll take a look at Torah Tamima, and of course, I don't have I do have a Mikraot Kedolot. The print is so small, I have to use a magnifying glass to read it. So looking at people like Nachmanides or Ibn Ezra, so this, you realize that we are moving horizontally, but if you want to move vertically, you can take something like what we're looking at now and look at all the various commentaries and explanations that are given. So we're just looking at a few. So you should understand that as quote deep as we're going ourselves, it's just scratching the surface. So, I mean, we have to move horizontally, essentially, but I'm happy to dip occasionally and move vertically. So here we go. Here we have some of the origins, right? And this is in Sota, in Tractate Sota, that appears to have some kind of commentary in the passages, in the passages that we're studying right now, because this is page 10 of Masechet Sota. This is also from there, as you can see. vaYeshev Petach Eynayim. Amar Rabbi Alexandri. So Rabbi Alexandri says, Melamed, it teaches you, Shehalcha v'yashva la v'pitcho shel Avraham Avinu. So there it is. There's the very statement that Rashi is citing in his commentary. And here we go. Makom shekol einayim tzofot lir'oto. The place where all eyes looked forward to see him. And there's a Torah Tamima here, so we'll take a look at the footnote. Al pi midat hachnasat orchim. So this is because of his quality of hospitality. Shahaita regila harbe beveto, in that it was customary, it was regular for lots of people to be in his house. He opened his house. Kamosha katuv beParshat Vayera, as is actually stated in the Parsha of Vayera, and we of course have looked at it. V'nir'eh, okay, and it appears, the Darish Kane, that Rabbi Alexandri explains it in this particular way. Mishum dezulat makom zeh, okay, he says, with the exception of this particular place, lo matzinu b'shum makom, we don't find anywhere else, any other place, shem makom hanikra Eynayim, any actual location called Eynayim. So he's taking Petach Eynayim, meaning at the entrance of Eynayim. He's not taking it as a phrase, Petach Eynayim, which we're understanding as crossroads, or the Rashbam would appear to understand it as crossroads. But he's understanding this literally as Petach, at the entrance of Eynayim. And that's why he takes this word Eynayim and says it refers to Abraham's tent. So interesting, right? That if we were to take this as the pshat, right, as Rabbi Alexandri's pshat, Tamar is sitting at the entrance of Abraham's tent. V'zehu ta'am kol hadorshim b'drasha zo uvehaba. And he's saying, Baruch Halevi Epstein is saying that this is essentially the reason where he's going to quote other interpretations of this particular expression. In other words, because there is no place that is called Eynayim, right? And he's understanding Petach in its normal sense of meaning entrance of, like Petach HaOil, in that we see later on regarding the Mishkan. It means at the entrance of the tent. So at the entrance of Eynayim, and since there is no place called Eynayim, just to summarize and repeat the argument, that means we have to look at Eynayim in a midrashic sense, or that it opens up that possibility. So I want to comment a little bit further now, because I think, at least in this sense, I believe we were going in the right direction yesterday in terms of trying to interpret this. So if we understand literally that Rabbi Alexandri is understanding that Tamar went and sat at the entrance of Abraham's tent. I was trying to first of all find out, can we do the chronology in such a way that Abraham is alive at this particular moment? And we know Abraham was 175 when he died. He lived 175 years. And I wasn't able to complete doing the chronology. It gets a little complicated. We were working a little bit before we started recording this class, trying to figure it out. So, having said that, moving away from the pshat for a moment, saying that she was sitting at Abraham's tent, to me, would indicate her desire, which we mentioned yesterday, her deep, deep desire to fulfill Abraham's greatest wish, which was to have offspring. And this was what was motivating her more than anything else, was to have offspring that would share Abraham's vision of the world, Abraham's understanding of what it was to believe in God, and all the moral and ethical and halachic issues that would stem from that particular belief. And that's how we understand the literary element of this particular comment. In that literary sense, literal, not literal, but literary sense. Okay, so
there's a page on the 929 website that talks about Eynayim could mean like Mayanot, like.
Yes, I was thinking, right.
So they think maybe it's a location that's a little bit south of Beit Shemesh, where there are lots of springs.
Okay. It did occur to me that ayin could refer to ma'ayan as well, but I think Baruch Halevi Epstein is, at least this specific drush is obviously to be understood as Eynayim, meaning eyes. So again, from source, I don't want to comment on that too much right now. The thought did occur to me, and I had some thoughts about it. Let's keep going with this Torah Tmima that we're doing.
Can I share a thought?
Of course, please.
Petach Eynayim, opening of the eyes, could be in place of, symbolic as opening the eyes to truth. Judah having to accept the truth of his actions in that place.
Yes, very good. That's outstanding. Honestly, I agree. It could have that implication as well. It could have, right? Or the need to know the truth, right? The need to understand the whole story. But yes. It's good, and it is. You're right, Jocelyn. It certainly, is consistent with what I said before, which is this story turns out to be a turning point for Judah, a major watershed of the development of his personality and explaining a lot of his behavior from this point on. Anyway, going on. Thank you, Rabbi Danin Amar Rav. So Rabbi Danin saying in the name of Rav. Is a great Amorah. Makom hu sheshmo Eynayim. So he goes right out on the opposite side, and he says it's a place whose name is Eynayim. V'chein hu omer. So this seems to contradict what the Torah Tmima just told us in his comment, but you'll see it's ambiguous because I checked it out. So here we go. He actually supports this by quoting a verse from Joshua chapter 15, Tapuach va, and it looks like v'ha'enayim, right? So we'll take a look. He says more in a moment. What I want to tell you is the context of these particular words. This is a chapter that mentions towns and villages that Joshua conquered. It just lists these towns and villages that Joshua conquered and to which tribes these particular villages and towns went to. And so this is just a listing, part of the listing of those towns. So you should understand that. Let's go into the Torah Tmima here. Because he just said there is no other place that we know that's called Eynayim. Right, so Yesh Laha'ir. So we need to explain. She'eino mavi ra'aya l'da'atozo. So, forgive me. Rabbi Epstein is obviously very smart, and he knows what's going on here and how this looks like a contradiction. And he says we need to clarify that the Rav is not bringing a proof l'da'atozu to his opinion, to this particular opinion. Acharei debekatuv sham mevo'ar. Okay, because after you read what is written there, and by the way, I looked at Joshua, I checked out Joshua, and it isn't, Eynayim is not written like that. I think the second yud is missing in that, and in fact, the way it's vocalized is not Eynayim. It's not vocalized as Eynayim. And this is the point that I was making in saying that this isn't a really clear evidence to contradict what Rabbi Epstein was saying, what Baruch Halevi Epstein was saying. At any rate, he goes on to say something really interesting. Katuv sham mevu'ar, it's clarified, de makom ze haya samuch le'ir adulam, that he says that it's so interesting that this particular location that we're calling Eynayim was right next to the town of Adulam. Adulam. Now that name should ring a bell for all of us, and he explains, V'chan b'parsha mevu'ar, and here in this particular chapter, it is explained, Sheba Yehuda ad ish adulami. It says that Judah went to a person, a man who was an Adulamite. In other words, who came from the city of Adulam. Imkain, and if this is the case, hayu shnei hamakomot smuchim, so consequently, these two places, the place that he's referring to as Eynayim, were right next to each other. Umekavnin ha'inyanim, and so in that particular case, this issue gets settled in that way. So Petach Eynayim here would mean at the entrance of Adulam. That's how we're understanding it. That's, I believe, how you just take everything. Vedok, and he's saying, and I believe he's saying, this is clearly where we're going on this. So, the other thing I could say is that in this particular case, they are the other drashot, as we'll see, okay, which don't look at Eynayim as literally a place, okay. Follow what Baruch Halevi Epstein said, is that there isn't really such a place mentioned. Let me go on. Yes. Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani Amar. So Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani said, Shenatna Eynayim lidvareha keshetav'a. That she gave, that is, Tamar gave, evidence, Eynayim, eyes, right, to her words, support to her words when he requested to be intimate with her, when Judah asked her to be intimate with him, that she gave Judah support for that and saying it. And we'll see, he goes on to explain. Amarla, so Judah said to her, this is this imaginary conversation that Judah had with Tamar. Shema nochrit are you a nochrit, which means a stranger, assuming that means a Canaanite, right? A non-Jew. Are you a non-Jew? Amra le, she said to him, Kioret Eini, I am a convert. Remember, she had been married to Er and Onan, right? So she had in fact converted to Judaism at that particular point, or the belief in God, etc. He goes on to say, Shema eshet ishat, are you married? She says, Amra le pnuya ani. She said to him, I am free. I am unmarried. All the truth, right? Shema kibel bacha avicha kiddushin. And he says, well, possibly your father accepted a betrothal on your behalf? In other words, are you betrothed? Amrale yetoma ani. She said to him, I am an orphan. Shema tme'at. He says to her basically, are you in menstruation? Amrale tohora ani. And she said to him, no, I am not. So that's how Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani explains Petach Eynayim, opening up a way. So giving legitimacy, something like that. Let's take a look at the Torah Tamima on this. V'zehu hapirush shenatna Eynayim lidvareha. And this, of course, is the explanation of his saying, of Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani saying, that she gave eyes to her words. Klomar, that is to say, shenatna dumugugma, that she gave examples, upetach heter, and an opening of acceptance of allowing this, lahasfekot shesha'al, to the questions that Judah asked. In other words, whether or not this was legitimate, could be legitimate. Ukidamafaresh, and as we explain, ve'ien od, and see further, me'inyan ha'agadazo, this particular agadah, this particular legend, b'chidushe agadot, in the new, this is novella of agadot, Maharsha. Maharsha is he is a commentator that you find at the back of the Vilna Shas, and he has some really wonderful both halachic interpretations, but also agadic, deep agadic interpretations that are shared in the back of the Shas. So this is, of course, we know that Judah was not aware that he was having relations, he was going to be having relations with his daughter-in-law. And then on the other hand, we can also simply say, regardless of that, here he is, thinking that she is a prostitute. And since when do we think that kind of behavior is okay to do? So that I have not seen dealt with. The issue of how legitimate was this behavior, period, just setting aside the whole notion that it had a certain level of incest attached to it. This is not something that Judaism, smiles on. And maybe all that the Torah is doing here, because it says, that his wife had died and that he was trying to get comfort. I'm not saying that this is a legitimate, that this is legitimizing it. An explanation, I want to be clear, isn't an excuse. But maybe at least it's trying to give a context to this. So we'll go to the next one. vaYeshev Petach Eynayim. So she sat at the, however you want to explain this, right? Petach Eynayim. V'chi efsharkein. And so this particular comment, which comes from the Yerushalmi, right? This is the Jerusalem Talmud, and also from Tractate Sota, right? It says, V'chi efsharkein, was this in fact possible? V'halo afilu zonah shebezonot. And it goes on to say, and even the worst prostitute, right, eina osachein, wouldn't do such a thing. She wouldn't sit in the open marketplace, so to speak, or in the open crossroads and peddle her trade. So there's a Torah Tamim on this. Leishev, so explaining, Leishev b'makom meguleh ufarutz merubeh, to be sitting in a place that is so exposed, and parutz is sort of that there's nothing around. Parutz literally means to breach. So open. Shekach pirushe shel petach einayim lefi pshuto, because he says that you could say that that's a pshat, a simple explanation of this phrase petach einayim. Velo nechale, and so it's not comfortable. He's not comfortable, the author of this particular commentary in the Yerushalmi, lefaresh deshem makomhu. So for this reason, he doesn't want to explain it, that this is the name of a place. Ya'an delo matzinu zulat makom zeh od makom makol hamikra shem makom. See, he goes back to this point he makes, that there is no other place in the entire scripture that is referred to as Petach Eynayim. Right, that particular thing. Let's keep going just to see if we can. Ela shetalta eina. Here we go. Petach. So shekol ha'einayim mitzapot lo. So, but she literally hung her eyes to the opening where all eyes look forward to him. Amra lefanav. And this, they're saying in the Yerushalmi, is a reference to God. That God is the ultimate hope the ultimate one we look for. Amra lefanav, she said before him, Ribon ha'olamim, master of the universe, Al etzei reikam min habayit hazeh, may I not leave empty from this house. Meaning, of course, Judah's house, the house in the figurative sense. Nismach al ma shekatuv ba'agadot, right? So this is dependent on what is written in all the agadas, all the legends, to kol megamta bazeh, that her entire desire, what she was trying to accomplish, what she was yearning for, Haita lahamid banim mihuda, was to be able to have sons from Judah. Of course, initially she was married to Judah's sons, right? She might have gotten married to Judah had Judah proposed to her, right? Or betrothed her. Lakim zera v'shem leba'ala hamet. And so he says again that since she had lost her husband without children, she wanted to be able to establish offspring and a name for her deceased husband. Ve'iyen berasha hakodemet, and he simply says, and take a look at the previous parsha. In other words, what were Tamar's motivations? And so it's very interesting. It's not possible for us to attribute motives to people. Obviously, this is something that is a divine ability, right? And at the same time, of course, in terms of interpreting these verses in the Torah, to understand that this was Tamar's deepest desire, was to provide offspring. And we'll stop this here. I'll stop the share, and I'm very open to any comments you might want to make at this point. Yes, anyone? Before I stop the recording. All right, then I will stop. And thank you.